Hello and welcome to AAU Talks on AAU TV, brought to you by the Association of African Universities. My name is Isabella Tete Ahenakwa and I'm your host for today's episode. You know, for so many years, the University of Toronto has been at the forefront of international collaborations and partnerships, collaborating with African universities and also addressing pressing issues confronting the continent. And today we'll be discussing the University of Toronto's engagement in Africa. And with me here is an esteemed guest from the university. We'll go for a quick break. When we come back, I'll introduce our guest to you and then start with the discussion. Please stay tuned. You're welcome back from the break. This is still AAU Talks on AAU TV. And as I mentioned earlier, today we'll be discussing the University of Toronto's collaborative engagement in Africa. And with me here is Professor Wisdom Tete from the university. He's going to help us delve into the discussion. He's going to talk about some of their effective collaborative and the differences made and being made in Africa. You can also follow the discussion on our social media handles at Association of African Universities on Facebook and YouTube, and our dedicated website at tv.aau.org. Hello, Prof. Hello, you're welcome to AAU Talks.
Thanks for having me.
And also thank you for coming to speak with us on today's topic. I mentioned your name to our audience, but then before we start, I would like you to tell us more about yourself, what you do, and also about the University of Toronto.
Thank you. I'm Wisdom Tete, and I serve as Vice President of the University of Toronto and Principal of the University of Toronto Scarborough campus. We're a tri-campus institution, so we've got 3 campuses across the Greater Toronto region. And my training is as a political scientist, so my day job is my admin role, which presently takes over much of what I do. And I also serve as chair of the Presidential International Council for Africa. We do have regional councils that focus on particular areas of the world, and I chair the Council for Africa.
Great. Now tell us about the University of Toronto, what you've been doing so far.
So University of Toronto is a globally recognized university. We are top 10 of public universities in the world. We pride ourselves in how comprehensive we are, but we also take seriously our commitment to supporting communities around the world, whether it's in academia or outside our academia. And part of that commitment is engaging with partners around the world to advance our mission of teaching and learning, research, and community engagements that support inclusive communities, that support communities to thrive, and that help address some of the challenging issues that we all face as a global community.
Now, as you mentioned, one of your main motives is collaborating or partners with African institutions. So now, what are the main goals and objectives when it comes to your engagements in African universities and also African as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's important to put this in context. When we engage with African partners, is because we believe in co-learning, co-creation of knowledge. Knowledge has no boundaries, and talent sits everywhere around the world. And so we do this with a sense of learning from one another and together being able to address some of the issues we face with regard to cutting-edge scholarship that addresses some of the global issues that we all face. We think our role as an educational institution is to help to cultivate the next generation of scholars, leaders, and so on. So our work in talent development is an important part of what we focus on. And as I said earlier, all of this we do with an eye on how do we enable communities to thrive? How do we support our global community to do well? And so the collective commitment to the well-being of a world that is sustainable, a world that is able to ensure that there's inclusive and equitable access to various resources. That is our social mandate as a public university. So when we come together with partners, we're looking at how do we enable all of these aspects of what is core to our mission.
Now, how does this align with the university's internationalization drive?
So we are, our commitment is to be able to connect the world. And we connect the world through the knowledge systems that we involve in, so our research and so on, in various areas. And as I said, we're a very comprehensive university. So anything from the health sciences to the natural sciences, the humanities, we are part of that. We also are engaged in, what we call now with the terminology global classrooms, which we've done in different ways. We have our students go out into the world, we have students come to us. So that is change of a community of students is important in enriching our knowledge base, making sure that our students are global citizens and they're engaging with the world that they will be participating in. And we engage in various areas of talent management and development. We are an innovative institution. We support entrepreneurship across different domains. And those are critical to not just us, but to the global community of, of scholars. And African partners are no different. They all want to do the same things. And so we're finding a dovetailing of purpose.
Okay. It's good you touch on some of the achievement, because that's going to be my next question. Now let's talk about the success stories in terms of research and innovations. How did you accomplish that?
Well, I think the way we look at this is to define particular areas of scholarly interest, and we do everything from the basic sciences to applied research. We try to understand communities, and so our humanists and social scientists are helping us understand the world that we live in, advancing cross-cultural understanding, looking at what are the issues that are germane to all these communities and working together. Folks in the natural sciences and humanities, anything from addressing questions of illness with regard to, say, diabetes, cancer research. We work very closely with 9 partner hospitals, and so we're looking at clinical practice. We're looking at the basic research that informs clinical practice. We're looking at biotechnology and new innovations that help to address questions of well-being. So those are some of the things that we do, and certainly because it's U of T, we cover a whole gamut of stuff that we can spend the whole day talking about.
Now let's come to digitalization, which is one of the most powerful tools for Africa to accomplish the development policy like SDGs and the Agenda 2063. What have been your success stories with your engagement in Africa in terms of digitalization?
Well, I think, you look at it in terms of some of the work that we're doing in AI, artificial intelligence, whether it's from fintech to some of the work that is enabling the next generation of medical interventions. Artificial intelligence, and I think the notion of digitalization here is about how do you incorporate these new technologies into processes and so on. And I think it's important to understand it as not just, looking at the devices or digitizing technology, records and so on. But it's about how this is enabling a rethink of how we can approach some of the fundamental questions that we have. So AI is very useful in the financial area. We've got it in agriculture. We look at it in medical sciences and so on. But also importantly for Africa, looking at how we're able to ensure that our cultures captured and sustained over time. So some of the work that my colleagues in digital humanities are doing is very important to be able to preserve, to share, and to sustain.
Yeah, great. Now, what are some of the challenges you faced in terms of engaging with or collaborating with African universities?
I think a key part of it is when you don't have an alignment of values and principles. So anytime we've engaged in partners, we've made sure we start from a place of shared principles and values. Because once you have those in place, you can always use them as a reference check. And that has allowed us to surmount, challenges. I think we can always find challenges. It's whether or not we're committed to, surmounting them. And so we have challenges, some practical ones, like giving different time zones, right? So we want to do collaborations with our colleagues on the continent in terms of a global classroom where we're all sitting together synchronously. It's easy to do asynchronously, but if you want to have an exciting interactive conversation, you want to have something like this. But time zone is a practical issue there. I think, the access to the kinds of resources that we have are not always the same thing on the continent, and having an understanding of that. I think it's important for those of us in northern institutions to also understand the circumstances that inform colleagues working on the continent and appreciating that and working with a shared understanding. We as an institution always come to these encounters with a sense of humility to learn. I think that sometimes get in the way of partnerships because, it's like these folks know it all and these people don't. We don't approach learning that way at all. So those are, surmountable issues, but if you come from a position where we're saying, We're in this together. We have a shared purpose. We're going to work through the kinks in the system to enable us to get to the outcomes. I think, one of the things is, do we all hold ourselves accountable? And sometimes it's partnerships. You have misalignment of accountability principles.
Yeah.
So those are some of the challenges, but I think that they're always surmountable when you anchor them in fundamental principles and values.
Great, thank you very much. Now, in your perspective, how do you see the role of umbrella organizations like Association of African Universities in terms of international collaborations? How do you see our role?
I see that as key. So the way we are approaching this, and the reason why we have an MOU with AAU is because it allows us to build on capacity that's on the ground. It allows us to avoid duplicating efforts. You've got an institution that brings together over 400 institutions on the continent. Using that as a conduit allows us not only to identify, where the needs are as defined by our partners working through AAU, but it allows us to be able to build on-the-ground capacity, leverage that capacity to do a whole lot of things. AAU has such infrastructure on the ground that we could not dream of doing.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we're able to use existing resources as opposed to trying to create. Can you imagine trying to do this with 400 institutions as opposed to channeling it through this, which allows all of us to benefit from our shared resources and our shared commitment to the outcomes that we're looking for. And so that is the way we look at AAU as a nodal partner for us that allows us to reach far and wide.
Great. And that's my last questions. My last question, I mean, you are in the process of collaborating with AAU. Now, what do you expect, or what are your prospects in the next 5 years in terms of your collaboration with AAU?
So we've identified areas that we think are doable, because it's important to set our targets realistically. So we want to work in fostering research excellence on the continent. And so we bring what we have got in terms of our own resources, and then we partner with African institutions working through AAU, identifying particular areas of interest. So we mentioned AI, for example. We've talked about climate change and the work that needs to be done in that area, questions around food security, but more importantly, related to my own area of interest, questions around democracy and how do you build equitable, inclusive societies, right? So all of these areas are ones that I think we can touch on with research. I talked about talent management and innovation. So we have work that is supported by our entrepreneurship ecosystem in Toronto. We can bring that to bear on the work that is being done here and be able to co-share and co-design interventions, right? So that is one more area. And the final one, I think, is about building curricula that are global and yet reflective of the different places that we occupy. So our colleagues working with their partners here and using the resources at AAU, can you imagine when we have seminars together that we can share, seminars that focus on particular areas of interest, but instead of it being one-to-one, it's now a multi-dimensional, right, and reaching multiple audiences. That is our goal over the next 5 years. And I think that there is solid commitment on the part of all parties to make sure we get to those outcomes. So we're very excited about what is to come. We're hoping that when we talk again in 5 years, that we'll be able to point you to exactly what has been accomplished over the course of time.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, your last word. I'm sure someone out there is interested and want to tap into this benefit in terms of collaborating with the University of Toronto. How can the person get to such a beneficial opportunity?
I think my answer to you is to say, reach out to AAU.
Okay.
That is your conduit, because it allows us to keep it focused, to keep it at the right scale, and to be able to have things that are the priority for the higher education sector across the continent. So that would be my strong suggestion, that people reach out to AAU. You're certainly welcome to reach out directly to us, but we have some criteria that inform the kinds of things that we're able to do. AAU understands that. AAU understands the context here, and AAU can be that matchmaker that allows us to get to outcomes that we're looking for.
Thank you very much,
It's a
Professor
pleasure.
Wisdom Tete, for coming to discuss this important topic.
Thanks for the opportunity.
This brings us to the end of today's discussion, where we talked about the University of Toronto's collaborative engagement in Africa. And from our discussion, you can see that the university is doing so well when it comes to promoting sustainable development, and we hope to see more of such collaborative engagement in Africa. My name is Isabella Teta Hinaka. If you just tune in, you can follow this discussion on our social media handles as Association of African Universities on Facebook and YouTube, and our dedicated website at tv.aau.org. See you again.